All right, good evening. This is Chair Justin Cooley, and I would like to call this regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would Deputy City Clerk Megan Wilbanks please call roll?
Commissioner Flores?
Here.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Here.
Commissioner Khan?
Here.
Commissioner Munoz Morris will be absent tonight. Commissioner Tolley?
Here.
Vice Chair Houghton?
Here.
Chair Cooley?
Here. At this time, we will hear any public comment for items not on tonight's agenda. Items raised are generally referred to staff, and if action by the commission is necessary, may be scheduled for a future meeting. City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Chair, I have a couple of speaker slips for item 4B. I don't have any slips for non-agenda items. If anyone in the public did want to speak, please let me know. Okay, seeing none.
All right, then we will close public comment and move to the consent portion of the agenda. The only item on the consent agenda is consideration of minutes from the August 14th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. Before I call for a vote, do any commissioners have any comments or questions on the consent meeting minutes? All right, with no comments, can I have a motion and second?
I will move to approve the minutes from the August 14th meeting.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. All right, that moves us to the public hearings portion of the agenda. Any court challenge to the action taken on public hearing items on the agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the city of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Item 4A on the agenda, the appellant of 1137 Peach Street has formally withdrawn their appeal request. Therefore, there is no action before the Planning Commission on this item. And that leaves us with item 4B. The public hearing item before us is to review a conditional use permit for a new commercial cannabis retail storefront located at 2400 Broad Street. Would Cannabis Business Coordinator Ivana Gomez please present the staff report?
Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Ivana Gomez. I'm the Cannabis Business Coordinator for the City of San Luis Obispo, and I'm here tonight with Principal Planner Brian Lavelle to present a review of an application for a conditional use permit to establish a cannabis retail storefront in the Broad Street area of the city. The recommendation tonight is to adopt the draft resolution granting a conditional use permit to allow the establishment and operation of a cannabis retail storefront at 2400 Broad Street. So here's a quick overview of the project before we get into the finer details. The pictured here is the proposed retail storefront at 2400 Broad Street. The applicant, Embark San Luis Obispo, or Embark SLO, has proposed to establish this storefront in a 2,480 square foot retail commercial building. Now vacant, was formerly the Hanger Clinic, which sold prosthetics and orthotics parts. And again, this is within the Broad Street plan area. So here's a little bit of background on how we got here, because this is a multi-step permitting process in order for cannabis businesses to become licensed in the city of San Luis Obispo. And that process begins with the opening of an application period subject to city manager approval. So back in 2023, the city manager approved the opening of an application period between July and August of 2023. The city received a total of 3 applications, and 2 of those were retail storefront applications. Due to the limited nature of retail storefront permits, specifically our San Luis Obispo Municipal Code limits these permit types to 3 total within the city. The retail storefront permits follow a competitive permit process, and that process involves the review, ranking, and scoring of applications against the City Council adopted merit criteria. The highest ranking qualified applicant is then eligible to receive a contingent operator permit, and that contingent operator permit is subject to successful background screening of all principals, all owners, and property owners, as well as subject to approval of the police department's review and approval of a security plan. So back in February of this year, or February of 2024, the city manager approved issuance of a contingent operator permit to Embark Slow, bringing us to the conditional use permit of this process. So if approved tonight, Embark Slow would be eligible to receive a final cannabis operator permit subject to payment of fees. And finally, the last step in this process is acquiring building permits for things such as signage and a certificate of occupancy. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, retail storefront permits are limited to 3 total, and there are currently 2 retail storefronts in the city. That is Megan's Organic Market on Higuera Street, and that's indicated by the number 1 on this slide. There's also Slow Cow Roots on South Higuera Street, indicated by the number 3. And if approved tonight, Embark Slow would be the final or 3rd retail storefront located on Broad Street, indicated by the number 2 on this slide. Okay, so photoed here is a zoomed-in version of the sensitive use map submitted for this application. The star here demonstrates where the project site is located. And what this map is demonstrating is that the project site is located on an arterial street, which is Broad Street, as required by our city's municipal code. It's within a cannabis business overlay area, demonstrated by the black dotted lines here. It also complies with buffer requirements. So the city of San Luis Obispo has implemented buffer requirements to ensure that cannabis retail storefronts are adequate distance from sensitive uses like playgrounds and parks and schools. So specifically, cannabis retail storefront businesses are required to be located at least 1,000 feet from schools, public parks, playgrounds, and other cannabis retail storefronts. They must be 600 feet from licensed daycare centers, and lastly, 300 feet from any residentially zoned area within a cannabis business overlay. So to the left, the park buffer would represent Meadow Park, and to the right is Sinshamer Park. The orange cloud on the right is a residentially zoned R3 area within a cannabis business overlay. So photographed here is an aerial view of the project site. In yellow, the entire parcel has been highlighted, and it is worth noting that the retail building itself, in addition to all of its required parking, are on the same parcel. So this project site is located on an 8,000 square foot parcel on the corner of Broad Street and Woodbridge Street. It's located in a retail commercial zone within the special focus and cannabis business overlay zones. And lastly, the general plan land use designation for this site is general retail. So pictured here is that parking area from Woodbridge Street at 2400 Broad. The applicant has proposed to provide a total of 8 vehicle parking spaces, one of which would be an accessible parking or ADA parking space with an accessible route of travel. They've also proposed to add a 2-capacity bicycle rack for short-term bicycle parking. And this complies with our city zoning regulation standards for general retail, which mandates that businesses for general retail provide 1 spot per 300 square feet of retail space and 1 bicycle parking spot per 1,000 square feet of general retail space. In addition, the engineering department during the developmental review process for this conditional use permit has reviewed the proposed accessible parking for compliance with the California Building Code requirements for ADA parking and has approved that. Embark will designate this parking with signage to ensure that it is clear where Embark's 8 vehicle parking spots are located because it does share a common driveway with the neighboring business on the neighboring parcel. Interior tenant improvements. So the full floor plan is referenced as attachment C to this report. The photos here are the proposed retail sales area and screening lobby. So the floor plan includes roughly 1,000 square feet of ground retail space, roughly 400 square feet of secure storage space, about 330 square feet of employee break room space, and about 100 square feet of office space. In addition, the applicant has proposed to implement a contact-free screening lobby where identification will be checked before allowing customers entry into the retail sales area. They will have polycarbonate windows throughout and electronic access control for points of entry and egress. And lastly, they have proposed to include a privacy film along the windows to ensure that cannabis goods are not visible from outside of the building to comply with zoning regulations requirements that mandate that cannabis goods are not visible to the public. So here is a snapshot of that floor plan. To the right is Woodbridge Street, and on top of this photo would be Broad Street, the arterial street. Indicated by this green arrow here is the point of entry into the building, and that's accessible specifically from the parking lot, but point of access is Woodbridge Street. So essentially, all customers would be required to enter through this lobby area where an employee of Embark SLO would check for a proper form of identification for entry. Once approved, they would be allowed entry via electronic entry access into the retail sales area. So they would essentially be buzzed in. And each of these locks represents a electronic access control point of entry and egress. So essentially, other than the retail sales area where they would buzz people in, only employees of Embark would have access to these secure access areas with a proper identification badge. Exterior site improvements. So the full site plan for this project is included as attachment B to this report. The photo shown here is a street view of the proposed site from Broad Street. The landscaping you see here will remain, and that's because many updates to this building were made under separate permit applications prior to this one. That would include a building permit back in 2019 to replace 8 of the windows on the building, as well as encroachment permits in 2016 and 2017 for the landscaping you see pictured here, and replacement of sidewalk on Woodbridge, as well as the addition of ducts to serve the site. As I've mentioned, existing landscaping and exterior lighting will remain. Some of the minor improvements to the exterior are the implementation of a covered and gated loading and unloading area with an electronic swinging gate, roof, and cover. I've indicated that area on this slide with a red arrow. So this space, which was previously a patio, will be used for unloading and loading of cannabis product for to licensed distributors. So the unloading and loading process will be facilitated through this area. A licensed distributor will be able to unload product into the secure intake area within the building from this area. So once a licensed distributor or a delivery driver arrives on site, they will be able to notify an employee of the facility that they've arrived, and they will be able to be buzzed into this area because of the implementation of that electronic swinging gate. Specifically, this will be a 40-foot by 10-foot area with an 8-foot, 6-inch clearance. For further privacy, they have proposed to install a 5-foot tall wooden fence that will be between the 2 parked cars that you see in this photo and the covered and gating loaded area. Other improvements to the exterior include the painting and priming of the exterior building and trim, and they will also paint and prime areas inside the interior walls, the bathroom, doors, and frames. So here's a snapshot of that site plan. As demonstrated by the dotted lines represents the parcel. So as I've mentioned before, the parking spots are numbered 1 through 8 here, and as you can see, All of the required parking and bicycle rack are within the same parcel as the commercial retail building. Represented by the green trees here is where the existing landscaping is located, and that consists of planter boxes as well as a couple of trees. Indicated by the red arrow here is the electronic swinging gate for the unloading and loading of cannabis product. Again, upon arrival, a delivery truck driver will be able to notify the employee that they've arrived, and they'll be buzzed into this area to facilitate the unloading or loading of product into the secure intake area on the interior of the building. The brown dotted line here represents where the 5-foot-tall wooden privacy fence would be located, which is intended to just further enforce privacy for loading and unloading of deliveries. So staff has evaluated this project for consistency with the city's general plan. The project site is located within the general retail area of the general plan, which provides for goods and services adequate to meet most of the city's needs and that of nearby county residents. It's also located within a special planning area, specifically the Broad Street area, which is intended to create a safe, attractive, and economically vital neighborhood with a mix of complementary land uses. So the project functions as a retail operation, which is a core activity permitted in these areas. Staff has also evaluated the project for consistency with the city's adopted zoning regulations as demonstrated in the previous slides, and more specifically has evaluated the project for consistency with zoning regulations for commercial cannabis activity. So those are outlined in section 178680 of our municipal code, and those establish land use requirements and development standards for commercial cannabis activity. So essentially, anytime an applicant is applying for a use permit to operate in the city, they will not only reference the planning application resources on the community development website for all use permits, but there are additional requirements for them to refer to in section 178680 of the municipal code. And some of those requirements include the submission of an operations plan. Within that operations plan, the applicant will propose a odor, noise, and light management plan, a plan to ensure employee safety and training, community relations plan, and security plan. Each of these has been reviewed by staff for compliance with local regulations, and more specifically, the security plan has been reviewed and approved by the city's police department as part of the review process for the cannabis operator permit, and again, during the departmental review process for this conditional use permit application. Excerpts from the operations plan are included as attachment D to this report. However, sensitive security plan information has been omitted. The project is categorically exempt from the preparation of environmental documentation under the California Environmental Quality Act, and that is because the project consists of the operation of existing private structures involving negligible expansion of use beyond existing and historical resources. In addition, the project site is not on a list of hazardous waste sites and does not contain a significant historical resource. So with that, I will remind you of the recommendation today, which is to adopt the draft resolution granting a conditional use permit to allow the establishment and operation of a cannabis retail storefront at 2400 Broad Street. That concludes my presentation today, and I will open the floor for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the report. Commissioners, do we have any questions? I believe he's number one.
Okay, sure. Could you respond to the letter of concern from Rose Levinson Wirtz about the signage at the intersection now with the hawk signal? I didn't know that's what it was called, but are there concerns that we should hear about from that?
Specifically, Commissioner Jorgensen, are you referring to the questions about the hawk signal and some of the pedestrian concerns?
Yes.
Okay, yes, that this is essentially a tenant change The project is consistent with the underlying zoning. It was reviewed by the Public Works Transportation Division and determined that it would not result in a potentially significant increase in traffic. So essentially, there was no need or no comments from the Public Works Department that any additional studies needed to be undertaken.
So the concern in the letter seemed to be that drivers on Woodridge, when that signal was in effect, blocking traffic from turning, it would block traffic from turning and it seemed to confuse drivers. And this is from a resident who lives on some part of Woodridge, I don't know where. But that's not an issue, partly because there's so little traffic.
Yeah, I mean, the traffic coming off Woodbridge is somewhat limited. In this case, just the change in tenant use and the fact that there wasn't anything associated with this use permit that could potentially generate a substantial increase in traffic. It's just sort of a feature that's there, and this isn't a use that was seen in terms of the intensity that it brings, that it would warrant that level of analysis, or that it would be an issue that this particular tenant would be needing to resolve just to be able to occupy this site.
So presumably, there haven't been incidents from drivers on Woodridge inappropriately making a turn while somebody's trying to cross Broad Street, I take it?
We didn't receive any comments from the Transportation Division associated with this use related to that. We did get some comments also to reach out and make contact. The Transportation Division manager this is something that's under study. It's something that Public Works is actively working on. So there's certainly the opportunity to engage and receive public input and get involved in the process to potentially improve. I mean, this is for obviously a long time been a longstanding issue with getting pedestrian traffic across Broad Street. So there's an ongoing effort here, and I'm happy to help make that connection to get involved with Public Works on this.
Well, just having stopped at that intersection when people are crossing several times, what I've noticed is that for people driving south on Broad Street and wanting to turn left on Woodbridge, it turns out that the best and sneakiest way to do that is the instant before the light starts blinking red and you're supposed to look and stop, because all the other cars are stopped in Broad Street. It can take a while to make a crossing otherwise. So I've noticed people speeding up and making a left turn very quickly. They're probably inappropriately, because it may surprise the drivers coming from the other direction on Broad. So it's just I didn't know if that's what, it was a little hard to understand what she was referring to, but it seemed a little different. This is more the drivers already on Woodbridge. But thank you, that's very helpful, Brian.
And that was going to be my question as well. And just to be explicit about it, is it your position that this business is unlikely to result in any significant increase in traffic over the previous tenant?
That's right. It's also a general retail land use. It doesn't generate additional parking. There isn't a request for exceptions or anything like that consistent with the underlying zoning and general plan designation.
Thank you. You had a question?
Yeah, that topic was on my mind as well. I was trying to understand what the problem was and what the potential solution could be. So you've already talked about, it sounds like, I mean, what you just mentioned with the sneaky left turns to try to get in there. I've seen that happen too. We've got 2 of these hawk signals right now, and people are still getting used to how they work. So I understand, though, that you're saying it's not really in our scope to debate that or review it. I would say, since I go down Higuera and I go past Megan's, and there's quite a bit of traffic in and out of Megan's, and I think that I think there's going to be more traffic in and out of this place than there was into a prosthetic development or whatever retail it was before. But is it still consistent with the retail zoning? And therefore, I mean, what would be the next step for you guys would be to do some sort of a transportation study or to require that of the applicant, but it's simply a tenant change, and so it doesn't fall into that box. So all that said, I think that it's really a hawk adaptation situation, and that this one is kind of specific to what we're looking at is a potential increase in traffic. And the one that's over on Foothill, there's traffic there coming off of the adjacent streets. And I was just out there for the ribbon cutting, actually, on the new bike path, which is great, the Truro Greenway. All right, so that's what I had to say about that. It sounds like we've talked about it quite a bit, and unless there's anything else on that, I had two other things to mention. Okay. There was a previous application for a cannabis operation, and I remember this from a few years ago. It got built, and then it never happened. I know that's not really related, but is there like a 15-second summary of what the heck happened with that one?
I'll take a shot at that. Ivana, you can add on what I might miss here. Yeah, the brief summary on that is an operator permit was issued for the Natural Healing Center. That's about up at the corner of Francis and Broad Street, just a bit further down the street. And then you may recall, of course, it was in the news, there was the issues with statements that had been made and information that was provided in association with that application that was found out to be untruthful due to some criminal activities.
Right.
So that led to the city pulling the operator permit, taking the third retail location off the table for some time. About a year and a half, maybe 2 years went by. The city made some modifications to its municipal code to hopefully to ensure those issues wouldn't arise again. And then, as Ivana noted in the presentation, the application period was opened back up for all cannabis businesses, but it also was open for the third retail storefront.
Okay, great. Thanks for that reminder, because I was trying to remember what happened. So that hit, the review didn't make it down the flow chart as far as this one is now, is that right? And so we've already gone through that kind of screening. Is that about right, Ivana?
Yeah, so the background check screening process is done after or before issuance of a contingent operator permit. So
Okay.
essentially all property owners as well as principals and owners have to pass background check screening provisions before issuance of a contingent operator permit.
Okay.
So that screening has been already done as part of this review process.
Great, okay. Then the site plan shows a bunch of parking to the left, which is to the south, I think, on that site plan. It looks like it's all adjacent and kind of connected, including the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots to the left of that dotted heavy dash line. So that's not in the property. It's not part of the application. What's the situation there? Is that just like, I mean, because people are going to use it, right? And so who owns it, and is it part of this, or is it part of something else?
So all the parking located to the left of the parcel is designated for the adjacent parcel. There's one business located on that parcel, and that's at 2420 Broad Street. They do have a shared property owner. However, the parking will be entirely separate. And we have analyzed the parking requirements for this building at 2420 Broad Street, and the leftover parking does meet our requirements. They will be providing 9 parking spaces, and the required parking is 8. And that will explain that situation. So there is a common driveway, and therefore parking for Embark will be designated with signage.
Okay. And the other parking will be designated for the other property, I suppose? Or will it all just be kind of available? Because it'll probably get used.
Yeah, I believe that the parking for the adjacent business will be designated to that business. However, we do have the property owner here tonight, and so if they wanted to speak on that, they might have better input than I
Okay.
have on how they might handle the shared parking area.
Okay, great. And then my last thing, it was about bike parking. There's 2 spots. It's got one of the hoop racks is what's designated in the plans. Those are a little problematic, especially for the one that's up against the wall. You're running cargo bikes now and bigger bikes and electric bikes. It's 1 per 1,000 square feet, so theoretically 2.5 would be required for 2485 or whatever we have. I would like to suggest 2 more bike parking places, and possibly think about how they're set up and angled so that, I know that this is like the one that's in front of the Apple Store. And it's hard, when somebody's parked on the one, it's hard to park on the other because they're kind of leaning in. The other type of rack that has the tray and the bar that you lock to is more space efficient, so maybe a 4-pack of those, or even a 3-pack, because that would, I don't know if we round up. I would rather round up on the 2.5. And I think, we're doing all this alternative transportation stuff. I'd like to see 2 more bike racks. That's it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? All right, now we have time for an applicant presentation. Do we have an applicant presentation?
We do. I will get that set up.
All right. And we have a maximum of 10 minutes for the presentation.
Wonderful. I'll give a minute just to get the presentation. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to present today. Well, thank you, esteemed Commissioner and Chair Cooley. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a brief presentation to introduce Embark SLO. My name is Devin Wardlow. I am Vice President of Public Affairs for Embark. I'm joined by Bill Eiseman, Embark's local partner and property owner of our proposed retail cannabis storefront at 2400 Broad Street. Next slide, please. My presentation will provide a brief overview of our company, key facts about our team, details on our location, and how it is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and my favorite part, our commitment to community. Next slide, please. For background on who we are, Embark is a California-based cannabis retailer with over a dozen storefronts throughout the state, all run through merit-based licensing processes akin to what the City of SLO has implemented. We are a proud union operator working in partnership with UFCW across all of our storefronts. We are proven and profitable, paying more than $15 million in taxes and $10 million in employee wages last year alone. Next slide, please. Our leadership team brings more than a decade of cannabis regulatory and policy expertise. Our retail operations are led by the former CEO of The Gap, ensuring that shopping with Embark is a welcoming and positive experience for all. I like to share that going to Embark is somewhere that you'd feel comfortable bringing your grandma. Our head of security is led by Matt Carroll, a former law enforcement officer that has worked with cities across California to develop and advise municipal governments on cannabis security best practices. With nearly 400 employees, our commitment to hiring locally is a key component of ensuring our storefronts reflect the communities that we serve. Next slide, please. Our location at 2400 Broad Street is fully compliant with city zoning and is a prime location for retail cannabis. This 2,480 square foot standalone building on the corner of Broad and Woodbridge features 18 parking spaces with 8 dedicated for Embark specifically. It exceeds all sensitive use buffer requirements and is appropriately zoned retail commercial and is consistent with the policy goals detailed in the city's land use element and the special planning for Broad Street. Next slide, please. Embark's location is appropriately distanced from the other 2 local dispensaries, ensuring geographic disbursement while enhancing access for local residents. Next slide, please. Embark's site is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and will bring added benefits, including 24/7 security through off-site live monitoring, on-site patrols, and the installation of dozens of security cameras. Site improvements to both the interior and exterior of the building through increased lighting and landscaping. And additionally, Embark's good neighbor policies and volunteer street team will ensure Embark's presence is a benefit to our neighbors. And we really look forward to building relationships with neighboring local businesses to develop co-marketing agreements that support shopping local. Next slide, please. Embark has a significant track record of successfully revitalizing properties. Here are some images from a variety of our current storefronts to give you a sense of kind of the look and feel of what shopping at Embark is like. Next slide, please. Now for my favorite part, our approach to delivering tangible and ongoing community benefits. In every community we serve, Embark builds a board of local leaders and fully empowers them to direct 100% of our community benefit commitment of 1% of gross revenue to be invested back into the community. Our community benefits thesis is simple. You put the right people at the table, empower them with ongoing funding, and it equals our ability to nimbly address community needs. In addition to earning the trust of our Community Advisory Board members, our storefront is rooted in localism through our local partners. We are proud to have partnered with Sunny, Patrick, and Bill, who in addition to being local partners in the business, also serve on our Community Advisory Board. It is this board of local leaders that will direct our community benefit funding on a quarterly basis in perpetuity and will ensure transparency and accountability to the commitments we have made. For example, our community advisory boards support a wide variety of local priorities, including the funding and implementation of launching accredited youth drug prevention and education curriculums with the Boys and Girls Clubs across the state. The board will provide a grant to purchase the accredited curriculum and a grant to hire staff to administer the program itself. Boards have also provided funding to support access to healthy food programs, support for the unhoused populations, revitalization of underserved parks, and much more. We look forward to working with this esteemed group to deliver meaningful benefits to the SLO community for the lifetime of our business. Next slide, please. We believe community investment is a critical component of being a good partner to both the city and the community. Our commitment of 1% of gross revenue at the direction of our local community advisory board ensures that the financial benefits of legal cannabis are being invested in the needs and priorities of this community. We strongly believe in the importance of hiring locally and sourcing locally, as we want to ensure that our presence creates economic benefits to this community outside of the four walls of our dispensary. And lastly, Embark's commitment to paid employee volunteerism is a critical part of ensuring our team's members are integrated into the fabric of the community we serve. We look forward to being a true community partner to the city and residents of San Luis Obispo. Next slide. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions for the applicant?
I'll ask one.
Go ahead.
I thought Dave might do this, but are there any issues in adding additional bike parking? Is there create any conflicts or?
I'm happy to check with my development team. I love the idea of more biking, as I think that that's a shared goal that we all have of increasing sustainability and using alternative modes of transportation. I'm happy to check with my team. I actually texted my development director when you started mentioning it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So there's no lighting plan in the two sheets that were provided in the package. It just has the note that it'll comply with dark sky requirements for the city. Do you know what kind of lighting you're thinking about? And maybe this is an architect question. Are we talking about pendants coming off the walls, or are there going to be other parking lot pole-mounted lighting? Are they going to be sensor controlled? Are they timer controlled? These are details, I know, but that's those. I was wondering if there was a little more detail on that.
So I do not have specific details on additional lighting. I know that we'll be utilizing some of the lighting that exists today and then increasing lighting, but I don't have specifics on the types of lighting that you just mentioned. I'm happy to come back and look into that, and I can send you a follow-up on that.
Okay,
If
thanks.
that's helpful.
Last chance, at the moment at least. All right, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We're going to move on to public comment, and Clerk, you mentioned that we do have some comment requests.
Yes, we do. First commenter will be Bill Eisenman, followed by Terry Canefield.
Good evening, planning commissioners and staff. My name is Bill Eisman. I own the property located at 2420 Broad Street, which is the property being considered for the conditional use permit this evening. I'm excited to partner with Embark SLO. I'm excited about the venture. I think it's important to note, and it was mentioned in the questions to staff, that I also own the property directly adjacent at 2420 Broad Street. And as far as parking goes, our current agreement is that we've met the requirement from the city, and we're going to go through it kind of as a learn by doing Cal Poly process as we evolve into that. So we are anticipating probably some flexibility in the parking, knowing that that there may be some increase to that. So that has been considered. Outside of that, it's been a bit to get here, and all the way through that process with Embark, they have proven to me that they're going to be a good neighbor to the Broad Street community. I think they're going to be a great new business in San Luis Obispo. So excited about the next steps and hopefully receive your approval this evening.
All right, thank you very much.
And then Terry Canfield.
Hi, my name's Terry Canfield, and I live across the street on Woodbridge.
Feel free to move that mic down. There
Yeah,
you
I'm way
go.
too small, right? They can hear me now. I also have a hearing issue, so there might have been something I missed. That's why I was up here looking so closely. I live across the street on Woodbridge, and we think there's a mistake. The nearest residence is, we believe, within about 300 feet. We think they're very close residents. Now, I just want to say that I have no issue with the cannabis store. I appreciate, by the way, that light. It has changed our lives for the better. And I appreciate the improvements they're going to do. My concern is that the cannabis store on Higuera has an armed guard out there patrolling. And nobody's really said anything about where this guard would be, but an armed guard patrolling right there has is something to be concerned about. Even though the park is about 2 blocks away and the elementary school is another few blocks this way, with that light, we have children all the time during the school year going right past that building. It's a major artery for getting to the school and also getting to the high school, the elementary school, and the park. And again, I have no issue with the cannabis store, but the issue I have is whether there's going to be an armed guard out there patrolling, which I think would be really, really bad for all the children going by. I think it would be really bad for the neighborhood. So I'd like to ask if any kind of an armed guard patrolling could be inside. I have no issue with it out of sight, but I think the sort of visuals of an armed guard parading, kind of back and forth. I personally encountered this armed guard on Higuera. I was walking along and I turned the corner and boom, I was face to face with a person with a gun, and I actually really didn't like it. And so I'd like to just make sure that correct the errors, go out there, we can measure. I didn't, but I can take a tape measure. I think the residents are closer than 600 feet. And I think it's an artery for children, and I would just like an armed guard out of sight.
And you live across which street?
I'm sorry?
You live across which
I live
street?
on Woodbridge,
Across Broad.
across Broad, yes.
Okay.
So I live at 670, so we did a Google thing. I don't know how accurate it is, but it says I'm 300 feet away. I can see it like from my front door. It's very close. And there are some residents around there. They're actually homes. They might be in a commercial area, but they're actually homes, very, very close. So again, I want to make clear that I have no issue with the cannabis. I just don't want an armed guard out there where I can see them all the time and the children go by.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, Chair, that was the last of our public comments.
So I guess we're going to see if there are any additional questions of staff, and maybe if you wanted to address something publicly.
Yeah, this question is for Ivana. Can you pull up that zoning map just so we can show the neighbor what we're talking about?
Yes, give me a second to reshare the presentation.
Okay, and would you mind explaining the residential zone 300-foot buffer again, just for the neighbor?
So there are R1 designated spaces across from Broad Street. However, our regulations require that the 300 feet residentially zoned area buffer is for residentially zoned areas within the cannabis business zone. So essentially, any residentially zoned area within the dotted lines here would be required to be 300 feet from the business.
It's 300 feet within the cannabis overlay zone.
And Ivana, there's a,
Across Broad Street?
Right.
Yeah, so that's not within the overlay
Okay, so
The buffer itself from on the arterial is considered.
Okay, so we still have an issue of children walking past, and my issue is an armed guard out there. So I'd like to know where the armed guard is going to be.
Ma'am, we will ask those questions. I did note those questions, and we do intend to ask those as well.
And my second question is, I guess, with the armed guard, if we can have the presenter come up, can you talk to us about, I know that you have some security plans that are sensitive, but can you speak on that, please?
Well, thank you for the question, and I appreciate.
Very well, I have to come closer. Hearing issue.
Thank you for the question, and I appreciate the concern and consideration of that. So one of the benefits of the layout of this specific building is that there is a waiting room. I think that the dispensary that you're referencing does not have kind of a waiting lobby area. So typically the security guard, there's 2 security guards. One would be in the waiting room lobby area, kind of seeing people come in and out. And then one will be on the floor of the sales, in the sales floor.
So indoor security guards?
Right. So
Inside?
And are they armed?
it's per the city's code, so if yes. Whatever your city requires, we will comply with. And yes, the armed guard will be in the interior, but of course, you know, if there's an issue, they can obviously step outside, and that's part of the purpose of being in an accessible area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think the remaining question we might have had for staff is, we know that there are buffer requirements for schools, but are there any requirements for distance from, I don't know, routes commonly taken from children on the way to school?
I don't believe so. You had the criteria up on that slide, the actual buffer criteria. I don't believe it includes any.
All right,
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
the buffer
Routes traveled.
requirements, yeah, the buffer requirements do not include any routes of travel. It's also worth noting that these buffer requirements are specific to the city of San Luis Obispo. The state doesn't have the same buffer requirements. They're a lot less stringent. However, I will share a slide with you that will greater demonstrate the buffer requirements and where they're located. So this slide demonstrates where each of the 3 cannabis retail storefronts are located. And so this is kind of a zoomed out version of that buffer zone. So as you can see, the Broad Street location at 2400 Broad Street is outside of all of those buffer requirements. And those include, again, parks, schools, residentially zoned areas that are within the cannabis business overlay zones, as well as childcare centers.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for staff? One more.
The diagram that you showed with the cannabis overlay zone, there was a heavy dashed line off to the upper right, but I didn't see it continue around. It was a little confusing. Does that just come right down Broad Street? Where it didn't show the whole picture there, right? Yeah. Yeah. So we got the dashed line over to the right, and then what happens when it comes over to Santa Barbara? Then where does it go?
Yeah, so it'll end with the arterial street. So a requirement for retail storefronts are that they are located on an arterial street. So that because of that location, that arterial street demonstrates where that cannabis overlay would end. However, if you wanted to see how, like what distance that overlay extends to, I could bring up the greater map here. And as you can see, it ends along this area here. I'm not sure the exact street.
Well, that answers the question.
Okay.
That it goes down Santa Barbara and then comes down Broad Street. Okay.
That's
It might have
correct.
been a little more clear to continue that line around. So could somebody have been on the other side of Broad Street and proposed cannabis?
No, they would not be able to because that is not a designated cannabis overlay zone. So
Okay.
the side to the left of Broad Street, the city council has not designated that area as a cannabis overlay zone and therefore would not be eligible to establish any type of cannabis business.
Okay. And then there was this question about route of travel, children walking to school, but it sounds like the fact that there is no exterior armed guard satisfies the issue there. And public comments closed, otherwise I would say, but I'll just leave it at that.
All right, thank you very much. At this point, anyone like to make a motion or deliberate further? Open to either of those?
Can make a motion to approve this conditional use permit, the findings and conditions.
All right, we have a motion to approve staff's recommendations, making the findings and approve.
I'll second, but I'd like to add the condition of producing 4 bicycle spaces as Commissioner Houghton suggested. I think that's a good idea. So I'd like to go back and ask the maker of the motion if that were acceptable.
It's acceptable. So I would change my motion to approve the conditional use permit with revised conditions to add additional bike parking and the findings.
And I just want to check with the city attorney if we're within our rights to amend that.
Yeah, under our zoning regulations, the ability to impose conditions on a use permit does include on-site improvements or other improvements as necessary if there's unusual site conditions and, also conditions related to kind of traffic and pedestrian generation. So I think that it falls within that scope based on what I've heard from the commission. I would be interested to hear from the applicant to just ensure that it is feasible. I would think so, but if there is a hard bar, we should understand that. But they're nodding in agreement, so I think we're good to go.
We have a thumbs up on the record from the applicant.
Okay, that sounds good.
Is staff comfortable with what the motion is now? All right.
Before the vote, can I make a comment?
Yeah, we'll do that before we call for the vote. So we have a motion. Do we have a second? All right, great. So any comments before we go to a vote?
We all get the public comments that came in, and we had the one about the concern about the hawk signal. Everything else was positive that came in. I just wanted to acknowledge that for the record. And this just seems like a good fit and a good location. And when you look at that map with the overlay and with the buffer zones, it lands right in the right spot, right? And it also is nicely separated from the other 2 that are already established. So it seems like a very appropriate place for the number 3 to go.
Any other comments before we go to a vote? I'd just like to add too that I also read all of the correspondence we received, and it was overwhelmingly positive. It also led me to learn more about the Community Advisory Board. I was really impressed with that structure. And so I also think this is a good fit, and I will, of course, be supporting this. And with that, can we get a vote?
Commissioner Tully,
Aye.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Aye?
Commissioner Flores,
Aye.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Vice Chair Houghton,
Yes.
Chair Cooley.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. So now we are to staff updates and agenda forecast. Would Principal Planner Brian Lavelle please provide the update?
Yes, certainly. Your next meeting coming up is September 25th. And this time you are in fact now scheduled. I know I provided this at a forecast before. It will be heard at this meeting. The Cal Poly abandonment and detachment item. This is for the faculty housing at Cal Poly, at Slack and Grand. The October 9th meeting currently has no scheduled items. You do have a couple of items scheduled for your October 23rd meeting. There's an item for amendments to the zoning regulations for accessory dwelling units. And then there's a housing project from Smart Share Housing Solutions. This is a 20-unit affordable housing project at 466 Dana Street, property known as the Master List Rosa Butron Adobe property. And you will be hearing that item on recommendations from the Architectural Review Commission and the Cultural Heritage Committee. And then you will also be considering adoption of a mitigated negative declaration. And that's as far as my forecast goes at the moment.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions for Brian?
I have a question for you, Brian, unrelated, back to the issue we had tonight. Did I understand that the cannabis overlay zone does not consider safe routes to schools, the roads that have been designated and upgraded to make it easier for children to walk to school or ride to school, bike to school?
Yeah, I think we were responding to that question in the sense of there isn't a specific buffer requirement that applies to certain transportation routes. Certainly,
It's not just the location of the school, say. I couldn't quite,
yeah, I think the
figure that out.
question was regarding the actual routes themselves and the buffer distance from the actual route to the location. If I understood that correctly, that's the way I took the question.
Kind of seems like if you considered paths to schools, the whole city would be red.
well, the Safe Routes to Schools, there's state funding to improve particular schools.
Like the Churro Greenway, right?
Yeah, well, probably not to that level, but it's a state after all that's funding it, no. But it doesn't mean every single street in the residence, it's the ones that, usually it's the connector and arterial streets that are most, where the biggest concern about safety is. So it's not every street at all. It's definitely the ones that are most commonly used. And sometimes there's big pedestrian crossings, like say at King Street as a crossing across South Street that's designated that way. So I didn't quite understand, you're saying what's covered in the overlay, the cannabis overlay in terms of, I understand the school sites themselves because we could see little circles. I didn't know what the,
I had raised the question because of the public commenter. You know, we know we have that buffer around the school itself, but I wanted to just, because she asked the question, make sure there wasn't some other thing we needed to consider about common routes to schools or
Right.
something like that, and there doesn't seem to be a standard for that.
right. But that's not irrelevant, I guess I would say, particularly for an elementary school, well, for any school. You would think,
Correct, Commissioner Jory. It's not irrelevant. It certainly is a site condition and something that can be considered within the context of the use permit as far as compatibility. So certainly it was appropriate for discussion, for sure.
All right, anything else for staff before we wrap this up?
I could tag on to that with, well, this is the third of three, right? Are we anticipating more ever? We don't know.
We're at the 3. We have not received any direction from City Council that I'm aware of to consider adding any additional retail locations, and yeah, just nothing on the horizon to consider any more retail.
So we might be done with cannabis siting, although it's always possible like someone goes out of business and another one pops up somewhere else.
For retail storefronts,
For
correct.
retail storefront, right. And also, this application did not include delivery, and they'll have to come back for that, or that is now allowed by right because of what we did a meeting or two ago. Is that right?
They would have to come back with a conditional use permit amendment.
For delivery?
Yes.
Okay.
Brian, you mentioned the Smart Share has 20 units, and there must be some other reason it needs to come before us, because I thought staff has approval up to 49 units.
Good question. Reason for that is just overall, the environmental review, the number of issues that are being concerned, the overall complexity of the project. There is expected to be some public interest in it. It just seemed like, given the fact that it also required 2 advisory body reviews and some of the issues at play, it made sense to go ahead and just bring the whole package to the Planning Commission rather than refer it to the director for approval.
So that's a staff decision, not necessarily the director's approval.
That's the director has the authority under the zoning regulations to elevate the review of any project to the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Last call.
I just wanted to take a quick moment to introduce Sarah Armas, our new Deputy City Clerk. Sarah's going to be shadowing some of our advisory body meetings and learning more about the clerk's role in the meetings, and so I'm really glad to have her join our team.
Welcome, Sarah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Most of us don't bite.
All right. The next regular meeting of the Planning Commission is scheduled for September 25th, 2024 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers at City Hall, 990 Palm Street, San Luis Obispo. We are adjourned.